And in the leader world, it gets a lot more complicated. You've got HR, you've got mental health counseling, you've got, in the workplace right now, this combination of technological advances and generational differences and world events and divisive politics has just put everything in this mosh pit of uncertainty and burnout. And behind all of that are people that need to be able to express how all of this is impacting their ability to do their job, right? So it all boils down to human relationship skills.
Stress, anxiety, burnout, these are all running rampant throughout the workplace. But our jobs as leaders isn't to be therapists, right? But how do we show up empathetically for our team if we can't have these awkward conversations? Well, that's exactly what Jen Marr, author and founder of Showing Up, is talking to us about today on the Next Better podcast. Jen recently wrote a book called Lifting Up, where she talks a lot about how leaders need to show up for those individuals and be able to be there for them as they work through some of these challenges that they may be having, but also being able to do that in a thoughtful and compassionate way that also respects the workplace and what it beholds. Jen started her work after she was a part of the travesty of the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting, and then within a year, she was a runner during the Boston Marathon when the bombings occurred. So Jen has seen her fair share of travesty in her life. And so she has dedicated her life to helping people come closer and build better relationships, even during those tragic and challenging moments. So listen in today as Jen Marr talks to us a lot about how do we form better relationships? How do we step into those awkward conversations? And where do we find that boundary as a leader to help people without overstepping into that space of therapist? Listen in on this week's episode of the Next Better podcast. Hey, Jen. I am so excited to have you on board. Let's have some phenomenal discussions about relationships, shall we?
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to have you on. We've had a lot of conversations lately with financial advisors and wealth coaches and things like that. I'm excited to break gears a little bit and talk more about a different way to develop wealth, which is your social wealth, the connections that you make with other people. And I'm excited to talk to you because you just recently wrote a book. It's called Lifting Up, which is coming out May 27th. I can't wait to get my hands on it. What you shared with me moments ago is this idea that this is not another leadership framework, which I think we can all agree we probably don't need another one of those right now. Instead, it's more about how do you build relationships. Tell us a little bit more about why you think that is the answer that we need right now versus another framework.
Right. Well, traditionally, I'm not a leadership expert. I have a lot of experience in leadership, but my background is in the behaviors of human care and connection. And this book kind of came about, actually, my whole work in this area came about just very organically. I didn't even really set out to do it, but I started the work really focused on our interpersonal relationships and working together through hardship, really helping people through those difficult times when it's very awkward. A lot of people don't know what to say. A lot of people avoid things. A lot of people say things they regret. And so my work started in that foundational phase with research, with working with different universities. And my book for that is called Showing Up. And Showing Up is almost like a peer-to-peer book of how we can be better connected through difficult circumstances. There's a lot of talk about connection. There's a lot of talk about online connection. There's a lot of talk about, connection through happy hours and, sports and things that we all, find similar and can connect us better. But no one likes to talk about connection in the messy. No one likes to talk about connection when you've got someone burnt out on your team, or you've got someone that just is going through a divorce and you have absolutely no idea what to say or do. And that is really the area that I've dove into for the last 10 years. So after Showing Up came out, I knew that immediately I needed to start on a book meant for leaders, because it's one thing, when you're helping someone through a tough time, in peer-to-peer, a lot of things we talk about are a little more passive behaviors, right? Knowing when not to talk, knowing when to speak up, when not to speak up, when an action might be better than a word. And so a lot of it is don't give advice, just listen and watch. Know how to use everything, know how to write, know how to see, know how to listen, know how to talk. and know how to do actions with your feet. But leaders don't have that luxury
Mm.
of not being able to give advice. And in the leader world, it gets a lot more complicated. You've got HR, you've got mental health counseling, you've got all sorts of different things. You've got, in the workplace right now, this combination of technological advances and generational differences and world events and divisive politics has just put everything in this mosh pit of uncertainty and burnout. And behind all of that are people that need to be able to express how all of this is impacting their ability to do their job, right? So it all boils down to human relationship skills. And so to get to your point, why this is a human foundation, these skills are the human foundational skills that are needed for any leadership framework. So we call this supportive leadership, but basically they're the human leadership skills of helping people through hardship, challenges, uncertainty. We call it a VUCA world, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguous. How do leaders lead through that when other people are dealing with that? And so this is that specific piece of the pie, those human skills, that human foundational framework to grow those relationships and get your team through a difficult time.
I love that. I love that.
Mhm.
And I like how you said it's a very specific piece of the pie, right? I do a blog for book reviews because I love reading, and so I was like, well, I read all these books, I might as well put it out there for people to see. And so obviously I can't wait to get lifting up and get that thing on the book review. But one of the things I talk about is like, what is this book not? Because I think part of the how do we decide what books to read, a part of that is knowing what it is not so that we can avoid it if that's what we're truly looking for. So you said this is a very specific piece of this pie. And I think there are so many different attributes to leadership that we have to develop, both in terms of the managerial piece, the human relations piece, and everything in between. What would you say your book is not for those people who are maybe like, oh, well, is it this or is it that? What would you say like you're not really trying to focus on?
Technology,
Yeah.
AI,
Yes.
increasing efficiency and task management. It's everything opposite of that.
Sure.
Because the more that we move forward on screens, we have to bring our humanity out. And so I'm on the humanity part, not the technology part. And a lot of people will say, well, technology can help with humanity. And to a certain extent, I'm not going to argue. There are some things that AI can help us with. But when you see people that are on screens all the time and then they get face to face with a person, it's awkward. Look at the new generation that's coming up. They're so used to being on screens that they don't know how to have spontaneous conversations and they look to their screens to craft their words. That's not humanity to me. I certainly don't want to put down AI because AI obviously is with us forever. But to me, it's those relational person to person skills, that those spontaneous conversations and really nurturing people to be able to keep that kind of collaboration, innovation, and relationships alive off screen.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's very important. Some of the work that I do, so I focus a lot on, how do we create meaning in our life? How do we find ways to contribute meaningfully to the world so that we can build a fulfilling life? Because I think those two things really go hand in hand. I've talked a little bit about the concept of logotherapy from Viktor Frankl, who,
Love that.
yes, right. And that idea that, we can cure a lot of neuroses and help people through psychological issues by helping them find a sense of meaning, whatever that happens to be. So in my space, kind of in a similar vein, is AI is going to help us do so many things, but there are certain things it will not do, and it will not replace a sense of meaning. And similar to what you're saying, there's this piece of AI isn't going to necessarily replace humanity. There may be ways that we can utilize it as a tool, but it won't necessarily replace that. So, can you share a little bit more, Jen, about where you think people right now are either missing the mark in terms of resources they should be using or places they should be going to learn some of these things? Or what is it that you're suggesting for people who are maybe have a hard time in what you call the awkward zone? I saw in some of your content. Where should they be going, or where are they missing the mark on that?
I don't think anyone's missing the mark. I think this is new. I
Hmm.
really do. I think
Yeah.
this is evolving as these factors evolve. I think, all of the factors I pointed out just a minute ago, whether it's technology or generational differences or just the change of world events and everything, puts us in just a completely different path. And the generational differences and the technological differences together have put much more focus on mental health. And so one of the things that I talk about, and I love that you brought up Viktor Frankl, because don't forget that whole point of his book was getting through suffering, right? The whole point of logotherapy is looking ahead 25 years and saying, what am I going to want to say I did at this time? And how the whole point is when we can get through hardships together, that's where we find our meaning, right? And so AI doesn't have hardships. AI doesn't have depression or anxiety. AI doesn't have emotions, at least that I know of. AI doesn't have a family. AI doesn't experience life the way we do. Therefore, we have to make sure that we double down on what we are as humans, not robots, and make sure that we are developing those human relationships to get people through hardship. And so in the beginning of my book, I really point out this is just, it's the natural progression of how things have gone. And we find ourselves right now in a world where leaders are facing these conversations every day and they don't know how to have them. You've got people burning out. You've got a younger generation that are walking in the door with a lot of anxieties, not a lot of social skills. You have older leaders that are burnt out and want out. There's just so much rapid change and so many things that have to change so quickly that all the levels of leadership are burning out. And you don't have a lot of young, new people entering the workforce that aspire to be leaders. So we kind of are having this leadership realignment conversation to really talk about who's going to nurture the leaders and and where are they going to come from and how are we going to do that. So to me, it's an evolving thing. It's not anything about missing the mark. I still believe this work is future proofing work that will continue to evolve over the next easily decades. And as AI technology and robots come on the scene and whatever, we are going to have to know how to double down on our humanity and not have people finding their friendships with robots.
Yeah. 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 Very well said. Very well said. So I can kind of hear it now in the back of my mind, like a bunch of people standing behind me, saying, this sentiment of like, we both agree people are hard, right? It's not easy to be a leader. People are complicated. People are messy. I'm messy, right? And so sometimes I think people get the sentiment of like, that's not my problem, right? Like why should I have to deal with this? I'm their boss. I'm not their therapist, right? How would you approach that conversation with a leader who's maybe struggling to recognize the importance of these tough conversations?
Right. Because it's a leader's job for results. And when someone is struggling, they're not being as productive as they should be. And on top of that, when they're struggling and they're hiding something because they don't want to bring it up, that reduces the productivity even more and it adds to more and more health problems. So what I love to talk about in this book is that this is a very, very pragmatic skill. It should be as pragmatic as a company handbook. We should not be leaving these supportive skills to emotion. Emotion brings in, and EQ is fabulous, but EQ doesn't teach the skills. It teaches the self-awareness. And so, in the book, I talk about the 580s, I call it. And as we've worked with workplaces, college campuses, law firms, hospitals, you name it, we talk and we send out an anonymous pre-survey to kind of get a culture read. And over the last 5-6 years, we've come up with this context of the 580s. And give or take 15% in any company, everyone's fallen within that range. And the 580s are this: 80% of people, actually, in this first case, it's probably close to 95, will consider themselves good, compassionate, empathic humans. You can ask anybody that question, like, hey, I can tell when someone struggles. I'm a leader. I care about my team. I can see when people struggle. If someone steps into the leadership role, they think they're empathic and compassionate because they are. The human race is, right? Of course, there's a few jerks out there, but for the most part, even they consider themselves a good, human. And so when we talk about, therefore, you have to have the skill of empathy or compassion, a lot of people will say, I already have that. So, okay, so that's number one. People consider themselves empathic and compassionate. And number two, when you flip that and you say, where do you feel least supported, cared for in your workplace? 80%, no one sees me. No one has any idea what I'm going through. No one has a clue. No one asks me. No one sees. So, hey, I can see you, but no one sees me, right? So that's the second 80. The third 80 is, well, do you tell people what you're going through? No. 80% no. So everybody walks in the door, smile on their face, leave it at the door is the old phrase, right? Just here to do my job. But they're hiding all this stuff with a mask on. When that's the case, when humans hold in hardships, it's really bad for their health and their productivity. So that's the third 80. The fourth 80 is, do you wish you could talk about it, right? So the old paradigm would say, well, work is work and home is home. And when you come to work, you shouldn't talk about your things outside of the tasks at hand because that's not what you do at work. And if that were true, then this 80% wouldn't apply because when we ask people, do you wish you could talk about it? 80% say yes. So then the last 80% is 80% just don't know how to navigate that space. So that's what we're dealing with. So it is a very pragmatic thing. A leader can say, I'm not responsible for, Jim's mental health, but you are responsible for his productivity. You are responsible for his retention. You are responsible to raise him up to be a better person than when he walked in the door. And you can't do that if you're not being honest with Jim and understanding what's all on his plate right now, what's all going on. And, let's be clear, this is not a prying conversation. This is not like, hey, Jim, tell me everything that's going on in your life. This is a very simple conversation. Hey, Jim, is there anything you need me to do to help support you in your job today? Done. And it's these little touch points all the time that ultimately Jim's going to say, wow, that person really cares for me. And then they'll start to get a little more open. Or the boss will say, hey, listen, I'm here to support you through anything. Don't, please just tell me. Like, we're only going to get through all this together. Leaving the door open, never prying. But it's always around, hey, if you're not okay, your work is not going to be okay either. So as a boss, I have a responsibility to support that employee with everything that's going on their plate right now.
Yeah. I love that 580s. We're definitely going to be sharing that with the rest of the world. I think that's great. That's reason enough to open up that book and learn a little bit more. I think you bring up a really poignant topic, which I'll share a story. I do a lot of pitch competitions for founders because I find founders and entrepreneurs to be very high achievers. And those are the people I love to work with. And one that I was talking with, she's the CEO of a fairly successful startup so far. And she talked about this idea that she wants her team, because I deal with the culture as well. She wants her team to take time off if they're feeling, a little burnout, or be able to work from home, flexible hours. She wants that work-life balance, integration, however you want to say it. And I was like, okay, great. How often do you take time off? How often do you tell people, hey, I need a little bit of help? Because she wants her team to ask for help when they need it. How often do you ask for help? She said, oh, I never do that. And so I said, if you want people to do that, they're going to watch your actions much more than they're going to listen to your words. So one of the things that I believe in, Jen, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, are if we want our teams to be able to speak about these things, I also think it's important for a leader to be vulnerable. And I don't mean gushing hearts, and I don't mean laying out our entire lives in front of everybody uncomfortably, but to say when something is bothering them, or to be able to share something, because I found that often I always picture, people sitting at home by themselves, watching their screen going, I wish somebody would text me and just say that they appreciate me. And I'll tell my classmates all the time, or my class, what if you were the one to send that text and then open up that door? So what are your thoughts on that idea of leading that by example and kind of being that one that starts that type of conversation?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it all starts with having authentic relationships with people, and taking the time to have those one-on-ones and being about whatever it is you can do to support someone. Now, I think the things you're talking about, make sure it's visible that I use my PTO time,
Mm.
that I walk around and see people, right? Like, I think those things are definitely important as well. I don't really cover that in my book, but if you are going to be an authentic leader, you can't be, do as I say, not as I do kind of person. But at the end of the day, the key role of a leader, whether they're modeling it or not, is to make sure they have time for the people that report to them. And to me, this is where this new skill is needed, because when you're in a task-based, highly efficient, technology-based structure and process, and you're not available for your team, communication breaks down. I think we break it down from all the programs we've done, and we broke it down to the core four. So, in this world we're in right now, you might call it the VUCA world, you might have another world for it, but as all these things are converging, the first thing we find is leaders aren't available, sometimes not approachable, sometimes not relatable. So availability becomes a key issue because the leaders are so busy with all the changes that they're trying to figure out how to reconfigure. They've got to figure that out. That gets passed down to the next middle manager, and they've got so much on their plate that they barely have time. And so a lot of times people that report to them feel like they're being ghosted, like they just don't have time for me. So availability is huge. It's like the number one, which leads then into the second thing with distributed work environments, hybrid, remote, everything changed. It's really created less networking and much more siloed communication. And so when you have siloed communication, that breaks down a lot of connection as well. So you start with leaders aren't available. Now we have siloed teams, and siloed teams may basically just stop collaboration and innovation. And you're barely getting the information out to your own silo, let alone getting it out throughout the organization. So you have that. When those two are in place, that leads then to a very psychologically unsafe environment. People don't feel that they can speak up. My leader's not available and I don't know what's going on in the company. Why am I going to feel safe to speak up on what I need? So it kind of stifles any speaking up from the leaders. And then that leads into the point four, which is just overwhelm and exhaustion. And so this is kind of the thing that's happening throughout all the organizations. And so we have then the lifting up five that offsets that, but there's a lot to unpack in all that. But I think that is also why we have to create those leaders that focus on that person, and model that one-to-one leadership more than anything else right now.
Yeah. You mentioned it might have been offhanded for you, but it was kind of like an aha moment for me of this idea of availability being kind of two things. It's probably more than two, but two that you mentioned, which was approachability and then relatability. I love that because there's a lot of people who are like, well, I have an open door policy. It's like, yeah, but people are scared to death to go through that door, right?
It
So
shouldn't
you're,
be up to somebody to knock on the door. It should be up to the leader to ask what's
yeah.
needed.
Yeah. And so could you touch on that just a little bit more of what it means to actually be available for your team? It sounds like that's something that's kind of important in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, it's a lot of what we focus on is finding the time in everyone's crazy schedule to have those moments where you are available, approachable, and relatable, right? And the point is, you will never be approachable or relatable if you're not available. And you have to do that intentionally because everybody is way too busy right now. So part of what we try to do is create the awareness that these are not long conversations. I think a lot of times people feel like, okay, if I'm going to open this can of worms, like see how I'm going to support my employee, that all of a sudden it's just going to be this long emotional conversation. It's just going to create more work. And now I'm burdened with their problems and this and that and yada, yada. And it's absolutely not that at all. It actually saves time because whether or not people recognize it, what's happening right now between people either going too deep into people's problems that they shouldn't be there or not mentioning them at all, both of those are creating a more difficult and more time consuming process.
Mhm.
And so it's one of those things that we have got to break through that in order to get people available. And so a lot of what we do is 100% time driven. We love to say the 5-minute one-to-one, the 5-minute check-in. All of our conversation frameworks are short because we believe it's a lot of little investments in the relational bank account that is going to create that. And those investments can be very short.
Yeah. I use an analogy I call it the trust bank. And so every time you have an interaction with somebody, and this is true of leadership and everything, every relationship in between, but if you have a positive interaction, I showed up when I said I was going to show up. I did what I said I was going to do. I was kind. I listened. It's like a penny in the trust bank, and you're just depositing over time. And the more trust you build, the more capacity you have to have a deeper relationship. The problem is when you have a negative occurrence, that's like taking a dime out of the trust bank, because we overemphasize negative interactions often in relationships. So, but to your point, 1 2 hour session is still, over a long-term period of time, is not as impactful as checking in 5 minutes a day. I think that's a huge, and you didn't say necessarily 5 minutes a day, but 5 minutes at a time. Simon Sinek, I just watched him. He talked about this idea that him and his friend have this little code where it says, do you have 8 minutes? They text each other that because it only takes 8 minutes to truly make somebody feel seen and heard. It does not take much. But
It doesn't take much at all.
yeah, you mentioned, Jen, this idea of like going too deep versus not bringing it up at all. So it sounds like there's an intentional, and intention is one of my favorite words, but it sounds like there's an intentional aspect of this. Now, without giving up too much information from the book, because people should definitely read the book, but how do you start to navigate that for somebody who maybe is new to this whole, like, okay, let's bring up these topics that maybe I haven't been comfortable with in the past?
Right. Well, I think you kind of teed it up. There's a few concepts in the book. First of all, we have what we call the barbell approach, which really helps lay out the boundaries for a leader to know what is my space compared to what is the space of a mental health counselor versus what is self-care. And we like to say that there's two ends of the barbell. The heavy ends of, wellness is going to be, one is clinical care. The other side of the barbell is self-care, right? But that hand that holds the middle is the supportive care. And people can't deal with the weights of doing all that clinical care themselves, paying for those transactions, doing all of it, and then have to go home and do all their self-care and their self-awareness without someone in the middle that is like, hey, I'm here to walk you through it. Those two ends of the barbell, the person that's struggling has to do the reaching out, has to do the pain, has to do all of those other things. The hand that holds the barbell, the supportive leader, is the only one in there that does the reaching in and says, hey, I got you. You're not in this alone. Let me help walk you through this. And that's why it's so critical. So first you have to have the boundaries. The leader needs to be clear on what is my role and what is not my role. We work a lot to partner leaders with HR so that they know exactly the resources, that they can be more that mentor and connector. But understanding the boundaries is really important to start. Then what we do is create an awareness of what our blind spots and barriers are. It kind of goes back, like, as humans, we all will consider ourselves good humans. We know that. It's kind of like 93% of people consider themselves in the top 80% of drivers. I don't know if but it's statistically impossible. So the same is true of how we relate to each other, especially during hard times. And you used the word intention, and this awkward zone is absolutely that. It's the gap between what our intentions are and what our impact actually is. What we think we're doing, but actually how it's ending up on the person. Because we might think, hey, I'm a good, compassionate person, then therefore everything I'm doing is good, and the people recognize that. But that's not what statistics will say. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 80% of people saying no one gets what I'm dealing with. So you can't just be a good person. You have to be aware of what are your blind spots. So we have this survey that really, talks through 4 areas. And 2 of the areas just are emotional barriers. They stop us from taking any action at all. So, you might have a member of your team, they're dealing with something, and you just haven't done anything. They have no idea you're even thinking about it. And those are mindset barriers that either we're driven by fear and awkwardness, or we're driven just by, I got my own problems. I don't have time for this. It's not my job. So the one side is being a doubter. The other side is being a deflector. And
Mm.
in our training, we create this common language to it, right? So when we just overthink or underthink, right? The doubter overthinks, the deflector underthinks, stopping you from taking any action at all. But the next layer is you're with that person all the time. You've interacted with them and they walk away saying, ay, 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 they have no clue what I'm dealing with, right? And this happens all the time too. So these are our action barriers, our responding barriers. And either we've overdone it or underdone it. So either we've been the one to choke, go, just try to fix it, diving in too deep, like we said, or we just completely avoid it. We're there face to face with them and never even bring it up. And that's the avoider. And so there's just hundreds of behaviors under each of those buckets. We narrow it down to like, you know, 10 or 20 for each of those buckets to help people recognize, where do I get tripped up? You know, do I tend to be more deflective? Do I tend to be more doubting? And as we are aware of this and realizing like, come on, my intentions are good, but this is what I end up doing, then it becomes much easier to apply the skills because you've got this like inner compass that says, trying to fix it, or, oh, geez, I'm deflecting, you know, and there's always simple answers to any of those, but we first have to be aware of what's stopping us and what that gap is that is creating that gap between intention and impact.
Yeah, yeah. I've noticed the unfortunate circumstances oftentimes because it's really hard for us. I don't know if it's unfortunate. I'm a coach. And so if everybody was so self-aware that they could just fix all of their own problems, I wouldn't have a job. Right. So I don't know how I feel about it. Maybe I would wish that for everybody and then I could go mow your lawns or something.
Oh, there's still a lot more on top of that. I trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we will never all be aware of our blind spots. You have job security.
Yes. I love that. And so what would you say, Jen, then that people who are maybe they're interested in being better leaders. They know that they have room that they can grow in, but they don't necessarily know that maybe this is one of their blind spots. What is it that they're looking for? What is it they're listening to? I mean, obviously hearing it from a leader of their own could be one way, like you
Mhm.
need to read this book, right? But what would you say maybe they need to be listening for, or acting into, or doing to help them better recognize that blind spot that they have that lets them go, hey, this is where I need to be directing my attention?
Well, that's a good question. And I think it really is all your relational skills, right? And sometimes overconfidence is one of them. We call it the Dunning-Kruger effect. And a lot of people are way overconfident in their skills of caring for others, just way overconfident, just like we all think we're good drivers. And it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And Dr. Dunning will say that one of the best examples of the Dunning-Kruger effect is people thinking they're good caring humans. And so more than anything, it's bringing awareness to the fact that we've got a lot of people out there that are not okay right now. They're just not. And you as a leader are not going to have the most productive team, the most loyal team, if you don't have good relationships with them. And I think if you ask 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 leaders will say, I don't have time to have good relationships with people. I can barely get my own job done. And that element is missing. And yet I would say that if you get the relationships right, the other things will fall in place. And so I think you have to look for how you're spending your time and how much time are you with people. And at the end of the day, if our goal in life is to make an impact, don't you want to leave a good impact with the people you're leading? And asking yourself those questions. If you're really only in the job for the money and you're not really caring about the people you're leading, maybe you shouldn't be a leader. But if you are a leader, your number one job is to nurture and grow the people under your leadership. And so make sure those relationships are solid. And then that gets tricky and nuanced in the new workplace as people bring all these new problems into work.
I think a big piece of that conversation is kind of around the difference between leadership and management. And there's so many things out there that I don't even know if I want to touch on that too much. But this idea of, management is about processes, leadership is about people. And all leaders probably have a managerial aspect to their job. But I think it's really helpful to recognize the difference within yourselves. And there is no, you're a leader, I'm a manager. We're both in all situations. When you're dealing, it's situational in my opinion. When you're dealing with people, you're being a leader. When you're dealing with processes, you're being a manager. Sometimes you're working with people to develop better processes, and so you're everything all at once. And so I think a lot of times leaders might get a little bogged down. Like to your point, I don't have time to deal with relationships because I'm so busy over here with processes. Then you just have to ask yourself, is then maybe you're better suited for management and dealing with processes, and leave it to somebody else to be taking care of people. But like you said, maybe you shouldn't be a leader. But if you do want to be a leader and you do want to have an impact, I think that you have to accept that those are two very different roles with very different skill sets. And you can do both, but you have to ask yourself what's your intention in that space.
Well, I like that. And I guess I'd love to ask you a follow-up question on that because I'm tracking you, what you said. I think there's a lot of truth to what you said.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've seen it thought like that out in the working world with people classifying a manager that doesn't have people responsibility. And so it could be going that way with AI because the more that we have technology, the more it is a task-based environment. But to me, manager and management still has people under that. And so I'm curious, talk a little bit more about that because this might be something new that I'm curious to know more about.
Yeah, absolutely. And admittedly, I don't have answers. I'm a coach, right? I don't have answers. I have better questions. But to your point, I think that there is a world coming up where we could very easily delegate or delineate the difference between leadership and management. And what I think that does is that frees up. One of the biggest problems I saw when I was working in a lot of different corporations, especially larger ones, I focus more on founders and entrepreneurs and smaller startups now. I just love that energy in that space. But those large organizations, one of the biggest mistakes I saw them make in the people world is, hey, you've been here for a while and you're really good at your job. We're going to promote you to a leadership role.
Right.
And sometimes those
All the
people,
time.
yeah, right. And some of those people are like, why are you punishing me? I don't want to deal with these people. I want to do my job. But the only way to progress was to take on more responsibility. And taking on more responsibility meant a part of that was people, because people were tied with the job and the man and the tasks and the processes. They were so mutually intertwined that it was really hard to separate those two things. Now, we have whole organizations of one people that are, they're doing their own jobs and their own processes and things like that. I'm seeing a world where the further we go along, the more people are becoming, right now the term solopreneur, but I don't really agree to that. They're going to be a business of one who's really good at a very specific task, and they use other tools to start their business and do their marketing and all those things. And they're just a person who really loves graphic design, and that's what they're going to do. And they're not in a team of anything. They're just doing their own stuff. Right now, it's still a little hard to do that, but it's getting easier and easier to be your own business. And so I don't know what that landscape looks like, but what I do think, Jen, to your question, I think that there's a place where we can start to delineate the difference between I'm a manager who wants to just do my job well and I love systems and processes, and a leader who wants to bring people together and develop those people in a way that's going to bring out the best, the 1+1 = 3 thing. People don't like the word synergy because it's a buzzword that was overused, but it's exactly what that is. You bring people together and they get more done and accomplished than if they were apart. And so I think that there's going to be a world where that's allowed. I don't know what it looks like in the landscape of, we have 20 different solopreneurs all doing their same thing, but we need to bring them together so that they can have a seamless value prop for the world to be able to invest in. I don't know. It's a very interesting time for sure.
It's a very interesting time. 100%.
Yeah. So one of the other questions that I had for you, so it's this place of awareness that I think is really important for us to continue to consider, and recognizing when I'm a leader and how I want to develop people, and the people that I serve and who I talk to are servant-hearted, growth-minded high achievers. So one of the first aspects of them is they want to help people. So that in and of itself is a prerequisite for leadership, I think. Point, stop, in a discussion. If you're doing it for the promotion, then maybe find a different way to get promoted, right? Because people are going to be a part of that. But going back to this other piece of, okay, I have a leader who is interested in this conversation. They know that they need to get better at this. But one of the struggles I've seen, and I'm going to use another world of mental health because I think these are pretty well intertwined, our social health and our mental health. And it's this idea of suicide prevention. Now, anybody who's been trained in suicide prevention knows that one of the first things you have to do is ask. You have to ask the question, have you been considering suicide? And a lot of people are so scared to ask that question because they think that at some level, that's going to instill into that other person's mind, well, no, I wasn't, but now I am. And that just couldn't be further from the truth. I think simply asking the question makes the other person go, oh, wow, you care about me. Like you're here, you're listening. So I want to ask that to tie it into this question, which is, do you think that leaders out there are nervous about bringing up these type of topics because they're scared that the other person is going to feel it's inappropriate, or they're going to feel like you're digging too much or whatever? And how would you help them navigate that fear?
Super important question. It's kind of why we talked about in the beginning why leaders have to have boundaries, right? And I want to delineate two different things. One is if there's a fear of a crisis, if there's a fear of someone really struggling, is very different than day-to-day leadership. Okay. So mental health in the workplace needs to have people in the workplace that know how to manage that. As an example, you'll hear organizations that have suicide prevention training and mental health first aid, right? Those are training specifically for when there might be a crisis happening and how do you respond to that, right? And that's needed and that's good. It's not what I'm talking about in lifting up. So I just want to make this really clear because there's a really important delineation here. Suicide prevention and mental health first aid assume that the person is in crisis. So what do you do when that person is in crisis? A leader needs to know that there are people around that they can call on that have that training. My training is not that training. But what a supportive leader does is hopefully moves upstream so that less of those crises happen. Or if the crisis is happen and there is mental health professionals involved, the leader knows how to pick up when that person's back in the office and support them through it. So a lot of times what we work on with organizations is understanding, making sure they have a safety net if they've got an employee they're worried about. And one of those, a lot of organizations have mental health management consultations as an example. And an ideal organization would have someone to call that you have someone that you're very concerned about their mental health. You don't want to elevate it to HR yet. You don't want to break that you're just not quite 100% sure what to say. You would have a mental health management consult person that you could call and just ask professionally, how should I be handling this? So it's super important to differentiate. It's kind of like, when you take CPR, you hope you never have to use it, right? Sure. Like you're like, oh my gosh, like we all took CPR and we're like, I hope I never have to use this. So you don't ever practice it. You take it hoping you never have to use it. And a lot of times that's still the case with QPR, suicide prevention training, and mental health first aid training. It's a what if scenario. But a true supportive leader is one that's skilled every day to know how to support people so that hopefully, and that's how all of my research got funded to do this work. It's all funded by suicide prevention because this is upstream. We have to stop people from getting in those crises in the first place. Yeah. So this is what we do. We're upstream training and we're back end training. But if there is a crisis, then a leader needs to know how to manage that within the the framework of the organization, and we help to lay that out for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's extremely vital. I think I love the adage, see something, say something, right? Like just being able to recognize it, right? And as a leader, you should want that. Again, it's not your responsibility to quote unquote fix them, or to be honest, nobody's broken, nobody needs fixed. But your responsibility is not to get them past it or through it. It's just to get them the support that they need, similar to the resources they need to do their job well. And to your point, somebody who's not doing well mentally, physically, emotionally, can't do their job well. And if your job is to help them do their job well, then yes. But that again goes back to leadership as focusing on the people versus the process. If you see them as a part of the process, then you're going to see them as a cog or an AI or a computer that needs debugged or whatever, instead of the human that they are. And so you got to look at it as how do I pour into them and provide them the resources. So I think that's really, really important. So you
Yeah.
mentioned that your book doesn't focus on that. So could you share a little bit more about what conversations you're kind of focusing on and talking about a little bit
Yeah.
more?
I mean, the 98% of day-to-day conversations that happen, right? And to be clear too, what you said is true. Like if you've got someone that's struggling, the leader should be comfortable having conversations with them. So basically the book is laid out in two parts. One is framing the problem, the other is framing the solution. The last section of the book is a full playbook of just skill after skill after skill: how to have a one-on-one, how to have capacity demand check, how to have a stay interview, how to have all these things that just continue to grow that relationship and help people through hardship. The way that we frame the solution is, first we have to understand the building blocks of culture. And a lot of times in our workplaces right now, we want resilient workplaces. We're dealing with uncertainty. People are burning out. And so you hear the word grit and resilience a lot. And I think what we have to understand is grit and resilience are a byproduct of a supportive environment. Without a supportive environment, grit and resilience are not a solo endeavor. You cannot be resilient if you don't have a support system. And so building culture during these times means that leaders need to be skilled at, we start with the building blocks on the bottom of mattering, dignity, and respect. If people don't feel respected, if they don't feel they're valued, that they matter, that they're heard, that they're seen, they can't go anywhere. There's zero chance they'll be resilient if you don't have mattering, dignity, and respect in the workplace. Once those building blocks are in place, then you can go to the next level, which is deeper relationship building. And that's when you can bring in the community and the belonging element and really deepen that support. When those two layers are in place, then somebody can grow and be resilient and use their positive psychology all day long. And so the book focuses on those first two layers. When you ask what this book is not, this isn't resilience training, but what it is it gives you the foundation to be resilient. From there, we really talk about just how leadership has changed, like this dilemma of people not wanting to manage anymore and the middle managers being squeezed and senior managers wanting out. It's putting a whole different focus on that. And so then we get into what then is a supportive leader. What are the key traits of a supportive leader? We call it the supportive leader 5, which are 5 key traits, available being one of them. We get into how you scale this in an organization. All the work we do is measurable, it's scalable, it's sustainable. We have to be able to have these skills in order to scale. So, with all of that being said, the last section of the book then is a playbook. And the playbook lays out all those skills that really are the core of our experiential training, where we really make those skills stick in relationship to one another when we do our trainings.
And so, Jen, I want to ask you, we've talked a lot about leadership and we talked about the responsibilities of a leader and what it means to be leading and lifting up. Can you tell me a little bit about what your vision looks like for this? When you imagine the world that we live in as a result of the work that you're doing, these leaders have read your book, they've implemented the things that you've been talking about. What does that aspirational world look like to you?
Well, I think, first of all, at a very high, simple level, we're connected again. We are back spending time together and being comfortable in our conversations. Over the last 10 years with technology, our phones are a crutch, and we do a tremendous amount of our communication on our screens, which means that when we're together as people, it's a little more awkward. We don't have the conversations and the interactions like we used to. And I think as AI comes on the scene more and more and more and takes over a lot more of those really repetitive tasks that are taking up a lot of our time now, we will be moving into a much more human world where collaborating, innovating, and communicating and networking is going to really be unleashed. And we're going to need to have those human skills at the core of it. So, as a leader, understanding that through all this change and with everything going on, whether it's generational changes, technological changes, or even just all the world events, at the core of that are people that are uncertain with all the change. And so, leading in a new way is making sure that people are lifted up and guided through all that uncertainty, that they know the conversations they need to have, that they really know their people, that they help develop them to their potential because they've spent enough time with them, that they know them and that they understand them, that they show their employees that they're valued. And you know what happens is when that happens, the leader themselves feels valued. And that's how we're going to unleash our creativity. We're going to have to get back to those really core human interactions. And right now, those interactions are fraying a little bit. And so bringing those back to the forefront, I think, will allow our workplaces to move past this burnout and disengagement phase that we're seeing. And that's my vision for it.
Yeah, that's really powerful. That's a aspirational vision for sure, which I think both of us share because I couldn't agree more. I think a big part of our loneliness is our inability to be uncomfortable, and even in those micro discomforts. Angela Duckworth, who wrote Grit, talks about our phones are now our adult pacifiers. When we have a slight discomfort in an awkward situation, the
Mhm.
first thing we do is pull out that phone, and I'm not immune to it. I'm a human as well. And so that's definitely a big hurdle for us is how can we be okay with those awkward conversations and those awkward moments, because those are where we start to form the relationships that we have. And if we're not willing to go through that short period of awkwardness, it's hard to dive deeper into the real stuff.
Absolutely. As
Yeah.
we like to say, own the awkward. If we have the skills to own the awkward, then we'll get through. And awkwardness usually does come. I mean, look, even the most basic things are awkward now. But imagine then how, when people are struggling, how even much more awkward that is. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, we can tackle that. And there are skills to do that, which is exciting.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny you say awkward and how such small things are awkward now. I mean, students that I have will tell me, when I talk about like, hey, just strike up a conversation with the barista at your coffee shop, how socially faux pas that is to just strike up a conversation with a stranger. Why would I do that? It's well, what else? What do you have to lose, right? But that's the minutia of how awkward those things can be. So I think that's really important. And
Yeah,
Jen,
it's looked as confrontational,
mm,
where our generation looks at it as conversation,
mhm.
right? Like that's what humans do. For those raised on screens that have not a lot of comfort being around real time conversation, if I'm not comfortable having a conversation, then they're not going to be comfortable with me conversing with them. Therefore, that's confrontational. So
Mm.
I love that dichotomy of what I see now is native analogs might look at something as conversation and native digitals look at it as confrontation.
So interesting, yeah, because nowadays you get to choose when people communicate with you, right? That's why people love text, because I can choose to answer that later. And so I think what you're saying, Jen, which I think is really insightful, is if I just strike up a conversation with the person at the register, they didn't ask me to talk to them, so therefore I'm imposing on them my conversation, which can be seen as confrontational. That's an interesting take on
Well,
that. Yeah.
that's how it's viewed by the person that has to do the talking. Obviously, the bank teller or the barista behind the coffee counter, they're trained to converse with customers, right? Because they have to converse with native analogs. But the difference is the one uncomfortable with having the conversation, viewing it as confrontational, is used to crafting the words on a screen. And they can take the time to, I'm not sure if that's how I want to say it, or hey, should I say it this way? And if you've ever watched like native digitals, they talk a lot about, should I say it this way? Does this sound right? Like they're so used to crafting every single word or editing photos. And so these real time conversations cause a lot of social anxiety. And I think that's at
Interesting.
the core.
Yeah, very interesting. Hmm. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about leaders and their role in all of this and how can we show up for the individuals that we have under our care. And so a big core value for me and for Next Better is responsibility and
Mhm.
taking personal responsibility. We strongly believe that if every human took their own responsibility for trying to make themselves better and the world a better place, and that's 8 billion people on the same mission. And so when you think about, or when I think about this, it can be a little tricky for a leader to understand what's my responsibility versus what am I imparting on my team to take responsibility. So how do you help leaders find that balance of helping their team take responsibility for themselves versus what the responsibility of the leader should be in
Yeah.
their role?
Well, I think when I talk about this in the book, I like to use the example of a football coach or any kind of a sports coach, right? And On a team, everyone has their roles to play. But if the team doesn't win, the coach is going to say, I didn't create the right game plan, or I didn't prepare my team well enough for that game. It falls solely on the coach, but yet each player knows their responsibility. They have to know their team, and it's up to a coach to know if a player's injured and is on the injury reserve, who do I have to back them up? How am I going to play the game? How can I win even with these disruptions on my team? And I think the same is true with the leaders today. They know that if they care for their team, if they know who's on the injured reserve, if they create the right game plan, if they develop their team to their best potential, that's when the team is going to operate at its best. And so ultimately, it falls on the leader to give the responsible game plan, but also be in touch enough with their team to develop them and to know what's going on and to be ready to adapt and change if someone's on the injured reserve for a lot of different reasons: overwhelm, burnout, mental health issues, you name it. And so that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, as we start to get closer to the end of the conversation, one of the things that I found, so I work with leaders in leadership realms, and I'm doing a workshop here before too long. And one of the feedbacks I get is this idea of worry about the ability to delegate, and
Mm-hmm.
also conflict resolution, and also motivating the team. And to me, there could be very there could be millions of nuances as to why all those things are challenging for people. But I do believe that a part of it is I don't want to feel like I'm dumping. I'm worried that if I do delegate something, that my team is going to throw it back in my face, like that's not my job or that's not my responsibility or things like that. And so, what would you say to the individual that is having concerns or issues with that worry of,
Mm-hmm.
my team members burdened, they're overwhelmed, they're burnt out, and we have a job to do, and maybe a lot of us are under this pressure, and I don't want to feel like I'm dumping, but I also like they
Right.
have a role and responsibility to play for themselves as a team member. How might they navigate that?
Well, I think a lot of number one, it's important to understand when someone is overwhelmed, it's very difficult for that person to understand priorities. And so if they're overwhelmed, they have a lot on their plate and they're not able to get it all done. And now there's something new coming on the plate. And so in the book, we outline and we train the skill of capacity and demand.
Mm.
And really, what we would train leaders to do is to make sure they understand exactly what's on that person's plate that's overwhelmed, that maybe they're not able to prioritize for themselves, and have simple daily check-ins, like it's a daily capacity check. What's on your plate? Okay, just do this for now. And also the leader then needs to understand, okay, there's way more than I can dump on this person, and how can I regroup to get this done, because this person doesn't have the capacity to get everything done that I'm asking, and they're only going to physically be able to get two things done. And if a leader is not aware of the capacity and demand of their players, it throws the whole department into chaos. And so that's what we want to try to help leaders achieve, is to have these micro moment check-ins and to help those team members prioritize in the times that they're just too overwhelmed to figure it out themselves, and then stop the leader from dumping on something when they already had too much to do.
Yeah, what a powerful framework. I can't wait to read about that in the book. For sure, for sure. Now, I think everybody listening would love it if a 1 hour podcast episode was all it took to completely change the way that they're a leader. But YouTube shorts and podcast episodes, while I do them, aren't the full answer, and it's not the full way to get things done. So where can people go? They've listened to this. They're super excited about this opportunity to learn more from you. Where should they go to find out more?
Yeah, well, honestly, our website is showingup.com, but it's showing with a dash, showing-up.com. And that outlines everything. It outlines all of our programming, all of our train the trainer programs. As you can see, we're so passionate about this work. And it is done in a way that we train skills, we train people to train. We can do this in so many different formats. We have set workshops we do. And it will take reskilling in this area. So it's a practice that has to develop a little bit over time. Any habit, you could tell me better, what is it, 30, 60, 90 days to change? And so you have to have different frameworks along the way to just continue to put those deposits in the relational bank account in order to develop those relationships. I also would love people to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm Jen Marr, JenMarr on LinkedIn. And then that's where you'll also get a ton of information. Join me on different LinkedIn lives that I do, and really just join the conversation, get involved in the community. and help us get this work out.
Yeah. And the book that should be out by the time this podcast airs, what's that one?
Yes, Lifting Up is the latest book. You can find it on the website, but also Lifting Up and my first book, Showing Up, are both on Amazon and available at any online book retailer.
Jen Marr, thank you so much for all the work you're doing to help leaders become more empathetic and more responsible for leading others towards purpose and bettering themselves. The world is better because you're in it.
Thank you. Love this conversation and look forward to further collaborations. Thank you so much for having me.
Can't wait. Make it a great day. There you have it. Jen gives us a masterclass on what it means to show up and lift others up as you work through these awkward conversations and help meet them where they're at. As leaders, we have to be able to have these conversations with people. That doesn't mean we have to be their therapist. That doesn't mean we have to fix everything. That's not our jobs as leaders, but we do have to be able to show up for the people that we are serving. So check out Jen's work. Like she said, showing-up.com, where you can find her book, Showing Up, Lifting Up, and all of the work that she's doing. Check her out on LinkedIn. Her name is Jen, Jen, Marr, Marr, to find out more about what it takes to be a tremendous leader. So if you like this episode, again, as always, we're working with you through the 8 different areas of your life that you can improve in order to optimize yourself so you can live a fulfilling life doing meaningful work. And your social wellness is just one of those areas, which we talked about today. If you want to learn more about all the other areas and how you can continue to improve those, then be sure to subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, on Spotify, on wherever the heck it is you listen to your podcast. You found us here, so be sure you continue to check us out. Until next time, I am your host, Coach Woody. Make it a great day.